In this video, it's time for you to do the same thing we just did to geocode, but for fetching the forecast. Now, of course, there are challenge comments. I'm going to walk you through exactly what I'd like you to do, although it's going to be very similar to what we just did. Now, before I even pull those up, we can remove the old commented out code where we were making our geocode request. That's no longer necessary, as we have a replacement for that over in the geocode file. Now, I am going to still leave the commented out forecast code in place, as there's no need to re-go through the logic in our head. We can essentially copy and paste that stuff into the new function we're going to end up creating. Now it's time to talk about what I'd like you to do, and I do have comments for this challenge. Now I'm going to include an example function call as well, so I'll show you where you can find all of that on the web. Once again, it is over at links.mead.io/, this one is /forecast. When you visit that, it is going to bring you over to a set of challenge comments as well as an example function call to make sure we're all working towards the same goal. I'm going to take the contents of this file, I'm going to bring them over to app.js, and I'll paste them down at the bottom below the call to geocode. If you'd like, you could also comment out the call to geocode so you're not seeing so much output in the terminal. Now let's go ahead and talk about what I'd like you to do. The goal here is to create a reusable function for getting the forecast, much like we created a reusable function for geocoding a given address. Now you're going to create this function forecast in a separate file. You can create it in the forecast.js file, which you'll make in the utils directory. Once you have the basics set up, once you have the function defined and exported, you can require it in app.js and call it as shown below. So this is a sample call you can use as you're building out the function. It's nice to know what we're working towards in terms of the arguments expected. Now, step 3. Once you have that basic structure in place, it's time to fill out the function. In the end of the day, you're going to use the same conditional logic we used up above. If there's an error, we're going to do one thing. If there is an error property on the body, we're going to do something else. Otherwise, we will go ahead and generate that forecast string. Down below, you're still going to do those same 3 things. Right here, for each of those, you're going to call the callback function exactly like we did for geocode, where we have 3 separate distinct calls to callback, depending on what exactly happened when the request was made. So over here, for low-level errors, pass a string for the error, just like we did with geocode. We got a string argument back, and the same thing is going to be true for coordinate errors. You can always test that by converting one of these to a string and adding a letter inside of it. Last up, the success case. In this case, I would expect that our callback gets called with not an error, but with data. Now, data should be a string matching up with the forecast string we had generated up above, where we use the summary and then we move on to say it's currently the temperature out and there's an X% chance of rain. So in the end of the day, the goal isn't to change the functionality at all. The goal is to just break all of that out into this separate function that we can then use and reuse throughout our application. If at any point along the way you're not quite sure what to do, just look at the code you wrote for the geocoding example, because in the end of the day, both are going to look very similar, though obviously the response data and the URL are slightly different. Just as a reminder, if you're using the WeatherStack API, you already have the correct stuff in place, so you shouldn't need to make any code changes. The URL you're going to copy is already the WeatherStack URL, and the data you're going to print will already work with the WeatherStack response as it did before. All right, take some time to knock that out, test your work, and when you're done, come back and click play. How did you do? Hopefully, you were able to get through that without too much trouble. As always, we're going to work through the solution together. Now, this was by far the most code you had to write for a challenge, and as these challenges get harder, you might have a harder time solving them, and that is okay. It is by design. The goal is to give you more room to experiment, play, and learn, and less guidance, and that is going to be an important piece to the puzzle, though it can be frustrating at first, because you'll feel like you just learned this thing and you get it, but you can't put it into action. And that's okay. That's what the challenges are here to help with. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to create that function in a new file, export it, and require it over here. In utils.js, I'm going to create the forecast.js file. Let's go ahead and start by not misspelling things. Then we're going to go ahead and do what we need to do, which is to create a forecast function. So right here, forecast equals a brand new function. We'll worry about the arguments in just a moment. And once we have this function in place, what are we going to do? We are going to export it. So down below, module.exports, exporting the forecast function. Now we can go ahead and require this file to get the function in app.js that's going to make our function call actually work. Up above, let's go ahead and get that done. Const forecast equals, I'll be using require to require one of my own files. So // in the utils directory / the file name forecast, leaving off the JS extension. So now we actually have access to that function, which means that when I try to call it, at least things won't crash and burn. So that is step 1 and step 2. We have the basic function set up, we've loaded it in, and we have our example call down below. From here, we actually need to fill out that function, and let's start with its arguments. Now, as I showed you below, we have the latitude, then we have the longitude, then we have the callback function. So we have to set up all three as arguments for forecast. Right here, latitude. Next up would be longitude. And then finally, the callback, which once again, you could have called anything at all. These names aren't particularly important. You could pick anything that makes sense. In my opinion, though, these make the most sense. Down below, it's time to start the process of making that request. Now, if we are going to use the request module, we should probably load it in. Right here, const request equals, I'll use require to load in the request module. And once we have it loaded in, we're going to actually use it. Now, we do need the URL, and we already have that URL in app.js, so you could have copied and pasted this over. Up above, I'm going to grab the URL. I'll grab everything inside of the quotes. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard, scroll back down, and bring it over to the forecast file. Right here, I will also create a const URL variable. I'm going to paste the value in, and now we need to swap out 37.8267 with whatever value we have for latitude, and we want to swap out the -112 with whatever value is passed in for the longitude. Right here, let's go ahead and get that done. Remember, we need a comma in between. So I'm going to remove the lat and the long and the comma, ending with that /. Then I will concatenate on the latitude by referencing that variable after the plus operator. Then I'm going to concatenate on a comma. Then finally, I'll concatenate on the longitude. Perfect. It's Andrew with another weather stack update. So up top, we have the old dark sky URL with those variables in place. Down below, we have what you should have, which is the weather stack URL with the latitude and longitude variables in place. So we set up the base URL, then we add the latitude. From there, we add our comma, followed by the longitude, and finally, we wrap things up by setting up our units. So make sure you have that bottom line in place to successfully set things up. Now this is going to be the complete URL with the dynamic coordinates inside. We can now actually fire off the request to get the response, which would be the forecast information for this particular location. I'm going to kick things off by calling request like we have done plenty of times before with those two arguments, our options object being the first one and the callback function being the second one. Now we can provide the correct options for the options object. We have URL, which is going to come from the URL variable, and we have JSON, the value true. Perfect. Next up, we have the callback function itself. This is for request, and we know that it gets called with an error, if any, and a response if there is no error. Now we can actually set up the if statement much like we had before. So we'll start by checking if there are any low-level errors by looking for the existence of the error object. Next up, we'll use else if to check if the coordinates are bad. right here. To do that, we're going to look at response.body.error, and that is exactly what we did before. In app.js, the old code used that condition. From there, we have to set up some code to run if the coordinates are bad, and last but definitely not least, else. This is the code we run if everything went well and there's a forecast to provide. Now let's go ahead and actually call the callback function, which currently is not being used. So if there is a low-level error, what are we going to choose to do? We are going to go ahead and call the callback with the first argument, the error, and no value for the second argument, which is data. So we want to provide a value here, and we don't want to provide a value here. Let's go ahead and get that done. I'm going to call callback, passing in a string for the first argument and undefined for the second. Now, once again, you can leave the second argument off completely, as undefined is the default value for an unprovided argument anyways. Now we can pick our message. I'm going to use the message we used before, unable to connect to weather service. Perfect. Next up, if there's a problem with the coordinates, we are once again going to call callback. Now things went poorly, so we provide a value for the first argument and we leave off a value for the second argument. We can pick whatever message we like for this one. I'll use the same one we had before, unable to find location. Now inside of else, this is where things went well. So we want to leave off the first argument to call back. For that, we are going to have to provide undefined. Then as the second argument, we can provide our forecast string. Now we already have that string created in app.js. Up above, it starts right here in console.log, where we use response to get the summary. It goes all the way to the end where we close the single quote. Right here, I'm going to shift click to highlight everything in between, and I'm just going to take that, I'm going to copy it to the clipboard, scroll back down to the call, and over in forecast.js, we can paste it right here between the comma and the closing parenthesis. I'm going to paste it in, and there we go. We now have our forecast string getting sent back correctly. Now the function is done and we already have a call in place, so we can go ahead and fire things off in their current state to get the forecast. This time it should not produce an error. I'm going to run node app.js, and that is exactly what we end up getting. Right here we have the data defined, we have our summary with our temperature and % chance of rain, and up above we have undefined for the error. This is just a reminder that since you're using the WeatherStack API, you'd see a similar forecast to what you saw before. It would start off with a description of the weather, followed by the actual temperature, followed by the apparent feels like temperature. Now let's go ahead and make sure that the error message shows up when it should. The first thing I'm going to do is do something like shut down my internet connection. Right here, I'll turn off Wi-Fi. I'm then going to rerun the script, and I do indeed get unable to connect to weather service, which is great. Let's go ahead and test that middle case by providing a bad coordinate value. Up above, I'm going to bring myself back online, and then I'm going to update either one or the other. I'm going to make this first value a string, and all I'm going to do is put a letter inside, which is indeed an invalid coordinate pair. From here, we can go ahead and rerun the script. Down below, I'm going to run things, and what do I get? I get unable to find location, which is fantastic. Now we can remove the challenge comments, and we can see how much easier our code got to use. Right here, I have a call to geocode. Right here, I have a call to forecast. I could easily take these 4 lines, move them into the callback, and then do one thing before the next. That is exactly what we're going to end up doing in the next video. Now that we have these 2 functions in place, it's going to be easy to use them together, and it's going to be easy to reuse them throughout our code should we need to. All right, I'm going to wrap this video up by undoing that change I made. I'll remove the letter A and remove the quotes. I'm going to save the file, and that's where we're going to stop for this one. Up above, before we go, we can actually also remove the old commented out forecast request, leaving ourselves with just 13 lines of code in app.js. We can actually make that 12 because request actually isn't being used in this file anymore, which means we can remove that first line entirely, bringing us down to 12. All right, I'll see you in the next one.